They are dangerous unless, of course, it's an issue that nobody cares about, like the alternative vote. But we have reached the place where the only democratic, legitimate, peaceful and consensual way through this appalling mess is to give the people the final say. Let our future not be one that anyone can claim was foisted on Britain and not by politicians, by this Prime Minister's Whitehall, Brussels stitch-up. Let our future be one that is owned by the British people, that was endorsed by the British people, that has a legitimacy that brings the unity and the healing that only a final say can bring.
Thank you. Ranald Wardener.
Speaker, it's a pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman who talks about winners and losers. But this is not about winners and losers, it's about what's right. And the Prime Minister has repeatedly said that no deal is better than a bad deal. I believe a deal is possible, but this is not it. This is a bad deal. Now, I know that some, both in this place and beyond, have expressed their wish to agree it anyway. People who continued to campaign for Remain after the referendum in order to guarantee that we avoid no deal, or people that believed in leave but out of party loyalty or fear of Brexit seek to support the deal in front of us. I respect that others will vote as they see fit. It's important for every member to act in good conscience, but it is for that very reason that I cannot support this deal. Trust in politics remains at an all-time low. To pretend that this deal delivers on the referendum only continues to foster the distrust we've seen out there. Let's be honest with people. This deal doesn't deliver on the referendum. It retains the worst parts of the European Union without the real benefits of Brexit. So I happen to agree with the vast majority of my constituents who've contacted me, both Leave and Remain voters, who've urged me to vote against this deal. Nonetheless, let me be clear. I do want to secure a deal with the European Union. I continue to believe that we can still agree one. And I do believe that the negotiation now, sadly, does potentially need to continue, even after a no-deal departure from the European Union on the 29th of March. We must be bolder if we wish to strike the best deal for Britain, whether before D-Day or beyond.
Mr. Speaker, this should be a historic day for the future of our country and Parliament. This was once the chamber of Winston Churchill and Clement Attlee. Instead, it is a day of high farce and self-delusion. The government pressing ahead with a deal they've known for weeks is dead. The leadership of my former party offering the illusion of an election when they have no chance of winning a no-confidence vote. The no-deal camp, who have no regard for the impact this would have on our constituents. In the last chance saloon, it's incumbent on us to seek a pragmatic compromise which can secure a majority in this House and in all political parties. I don't care whether this is presented by the government or facilitated by this House. Putting Brexit back to the people would be an abdication of our responsibility. It has nothing to do with breaking a logjam and everything to do with seeking to reverse the result of the first referendum. It will further divide our country when we should be leading and healing. I cannot support this worst of all worst deals, and I genuinely believe that the only option which can secure now a majority in this House is a common market too. At its core, a very simple idea that we can be out of the political structures of the EU but maintain our economic and security partnership. This will require a radically reworked political declaration based on EEA and EFTA. After tonight, this should form the basis of the Prime Minister's new negotiating position. Or alternatively, the House will have to take control and seek a pragmatic compromise. Common market too, or something else. Our duty, Mr. Speaker, is to lead and to heal this divided nation.
Damien Moore. Pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman, and it's an honour to be taking part in the debate at a crossroads in our history. In 2016, the British people voted to leave the European Union, and the government and this Parliament needs to respect those wishes. I accept, Mr. Speaker, that there are passionate views on both sides, and speaking for myself, I've always treated those with differing views with respect. But it is wrong for some to suggest that most people didn't know what they were voting for. many of those that espouse those views really think that the people of this country should not have been given that decision in the first place. It is my belief that those that are calling for a second referendum are seeking to damage our democracy, as no decision by the British people would mean anything anymore, because once a decision was reached, those that were not happy would try to undo it, and this might go on again and again and again and again. Now, division is healthy in a democracy and in our political process, but a second referendum, I believe, would take our country to breaking point and undermine the dignity in our democracy. The withdrawal agreement does allow for some control to be taken back, and Mr. Speaker, I do respect that the endeavours of the Prime Minister. She has made a major commitment to this. Her perseverance is commendable and her diligence unquestionable. There is only one point I wish to make on this withdrawal agreement, and that is on the Northern Ireland backstop. The inclusion of the backstop is perhaps the most potent aspect of this agreement, given the fact it poses a real threat to the integrity of our United Kingdom. While some have tried to allay the fears with optimism, more concerning are those that have displayed a parochial indifference that fails to recognise our role as United Kingdom Members of Parliament, acting in the interests of the whole United Kingdom. The British people did not vote to have the foundations of our nation to be undermined in any way. And Mr. Speaker,
I'll never forget Warren, who I first met as an apprentice, moving into the house, a little Victorian terrace house with his partner, saying that as a consequence of having got a job in the Jaguar plant, good and well-paid job, he was moving into the house of his dreams with the woman of his dreams. The plant and the success of Jaguar Land Rover has transformed the lives of thousands, including in my constituency, Erdington, rich in talent but one of the poorest in the country. The company producing 108,000 cars a year at the heart of the Midlands economy. Now, absolutely key is the relationship with Europe. Half their market is in Europe. If they had to fall back on World Trade Organization terms, it would put up prices of cars they sell between £3,000 and £5,000. The millions of parts every day, the thousands of lorries, the frictionless trade, that relationship which has been absolutely key to the success of the automotive industry in our country. And Ralph Smith, the inspiring chief executive, together with the whole industry, have warned of the consequences of what happens if we don't get it right. What was the response of some of the honourable members opposite? Honourable member for Uxbridge, F business. Honourable member for Harwich and North Essex, he's making it up. Honourable member for Uxbridge again, not sure that Ralph knows more about the automotive industry than I do. And the honourable member for Chingford saying not one job will be lost as a consequence of Brexit. What planet do they live on? And that's why two things are key. This is not a good deal, but first we have to get to a good deal that works for Britain. We have to get up to that, honouring the obligation that we gave to the people of Britain at the time of the referendum. But secondly, in the meantime, there can be no question of a no-deal Brexit. In the words of Ralph Smith, no to no deal, because to go over the cliff on the 29th of March without a deal would be utterly catastrophic for our country.
Andrew Murison.
Percent of my constituents voted to leave, and so did I. It may be unfashionable, but I will be supporting the government tonight, because after the sophistry, chicanery and obfuscation of last week, I genuinely feel that we may not have Brexit at all. The Attorney General is absolutely right to say that there is risk in the backstop. We need to de-risk the backstop. My amendment would have done that had it been selected, as would the amendment tabled in the name of my right honourable friend, the member for East Devon. The amendments B and F had pretty much the same effect, since they would introduce a time limit. I commend them to the government. Mr. Speaker, in 2006, people weren't being thick or stupid or ignorant. They weren't overwrought. They weren't racist. They weren't prejudiced. They were not needing to be given a second chance, and they were not anguished, in the words of the right honourable gentleman, the member for Leeds Central. They just wanted to leave. They are sovereign. We serve them. Let's get on with it.
Adrian Bailey.
Speaker, The Attorney General opened this debate by saying this debate was ineluctable. The fact is, it wasn't. It only became ineluctable when the Prime Minister, failing to recognise the need to build a consensus across the country and in Parliament, started to adopt language which was inflammatory about the EU, red lines which ruled out much needed conditions for any settlement that would help our manufacturing industry and indeed the situation with the Irish border, and also opposed any parliamentary involvement in the process. By doing so, she alienated a body of people in this House and across the country which she would need to build the necessary consensus to get a deal that would be acceptable both to Parliament and the country. Mr. Speaker, I represent a constituency which voted 70% Brexit. I'm a Remainer. I don't pretend it's a comfortable position to be. I voted to trigger Article 50 because I felt I had to honour the referendum result. And I've been lobbied heavily to say that as a representative I should do what my constituency wanted. The problem is I'm also being lobbied on people who want a better health service, access to the doctor. They're worried about their jobs with Jaguar Land Rover. They are worried about policing and the rise of crime in the locality. And I know that all these which I am equally obliged to deliver will be jeopardised by voting for this particular settlement because it does not give us what we have now. What we need is for this to be defeated, the Prime Minister to extend Article 50 and for a consensus to be reached in the ensuing months.
I would have liked to have been able to support the government's motion this evening. I voted Remain and certainly I have deep concerns about this whole process. But I have looked at the whole issue of the backstop and I have been consistent in this respect, which is why an amendment was tabled in my name, which was not selected, and indeed a similar, rather better amendment, building on mine, from my right honourable friend, the member for Westbury, chairman of the Northern Ireland Affairs Select Committee, but that wasn't selected either. And I just cannot reconcile myself as an MP in this House that I can vote this evening to effectively commit this country into a backstop from which it has no unilateral right to withdraw. So it is with a heavy heart that I shall not be supporting the government this evening, because I believe there is still a deal, a fair deal, to be done with the European Union. There is a good deal which respects all our peoples and all our industries and all our businesses. There is a deal to be done, but Mr. Speaker, this is not that deal.
Neil Gray.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to set out why I'm to vote against the Prime Minister's deal. I start from the position of respecting the result of the EU referendum in Scotland. The people of Scotland resoundingly rejected the idea of Brexit and, according to the polls, continue to reject Brexit and the Prime Minister's deal in even greater numbers. And no wonder. It has all been about self-interest for this Prime Minister and the Tory party. She triggered Article 50 without a plan. She held a snap general election for her own self-interest but lost her majority. She ignored the Scottish Government's offer of a compromise which would have carried the House. She set herself red lines aimed at satisfying her extreme Brexiteer backbenchers but boxed her into an impossible corner and left her facing a no-vote confidence vote anyway. Failing to prepare is preparing to fail, and that's why I think the biggest mistake was triggering Article 50 when she hadn't done her homework. She tipped the hourglass with no plan, no idea, no backing, and today, 2 years on, as the sands start to run out, nothing has changed. She has no credible plan, no idea, and no backing. And now she is trying to make it a Hobson's choice in order to deflect from the politically inconvenient choices that do remain open to us. She should request an extension to Article 50 to allow the people to have their say. But the Tory leadership aren't the only ones to have acted purely out of self-interest in this process. The leader of of the opposition wants to renegotiate Brexit, but won't say what he would renegotiate. He wants a general election, but doesn't have a plan to achieve one, and won't say what his Brexit policy is going to be. He can't decide whether to back another EU referendum, and doesn't know if he would campaign for leave or remain. In conclusion, it could have been so different. On Radio Scotland this morning, the Honourable Member for East Renfrewshire rightly encouraged the Prime Minister to ignore the extreme Brexiteers. Sadly, his very sensible advice was 2 years too late. The sands of time have moved on. Instead, the warnings of Brexit leading to a greater chance of independence are becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I voted to leave, my constituents voted to leave, the country voted to leave, and leave we must. Which country? But I say to my fellow Brexiteers in this House that we must accept that we are a majority in the country, but we are not a majority in Parliament. If I give an analogy, we are 10 players on a pitch playing a team of 11. The odds are now even further stacked against us since the referee has demonstrated he is prepared to change the rules. This deal is not perfect, and I am concerned particularly about the indefinite nature of the backstop. But the risk of not supporting this deal, as demonstrated last week, is that members of this House will seek to water down even this Brexit or to stop it altogether. I will support this deal because once the withdrawal agreement is signed, the door to remain will shut firmly and we can all come back together and focus on delivering the best future for the UK outside of the EU.
I haven't changed any rules of the debate. What I have done is I've chaired the debate from start to finish, facilitating every honourable and right honourable member of every conceivable hue of opinion to have every opportunity to put his or her view. It's a point so blindingly obvious and so transparently fair that all reasonable people would, I think, accept it. Karen Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituency of Bristol South voted 53 to 47% to remain, and the closeness of that vote is something I have sought to represent and understand since. But the Prime Minister can't say that they will be better off. The best I've been told, even in private by Brexiteers, that there will be a period of uncertainty for some 15 or so years, and then we will perhaps know we've made the right decision. That is a monumental leap into the unknown that I will not make for my family, and I will not make it for my constituency. And it is a shocking dereliction of responsibility by the Prime Minister that she asks us to do so. I want to talk briefly about our precious union. Mr. Speaker, the word precious means of great value, not to be wasted or treated carelessly. But this government has treated this union carelessly. Not only have the last 2.5 years done nothing to heal the 48-52 division, but they have done nothing to bring together the views and interests of people across this union, and only let out the destructive nationalist and separatist genies out of the bottle and caused great uncertainty across our land. The Prime Minister has not even done what her predecessor said and involved the devolved executives, the government and the regional powerhouses properly in her negotiations. There seems to be a glimmer of hope from last week. The latest Brexit Secretary started talking about targeting regional assemblies and the governments. That's not the sort of tone or approach we need. That is more of the same. If the government is to salvage anything from the last 2.5 years, then they must recognise the mutual interests of all our people across the constituent parts of the United Kingdom, and they need to start treating the English cities and regions with a modicum of respect. They have to start healing this country.
Leo Doherty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise, Mr. Speaker, to support this deal, and I do so as someone who voted to leave the European Union, like 58% of my constituents, because, Mr. Speaker, in my judgment, this deal is the only sane and sensible path to an orderly Brexit that will allow us, Mr. Speaker, to reset our relations with the European Union, not as an unwilling member of the federal club, but as a close friend and ally. And when we do this reset, Mr. Speaker, we must bear in mind the positive vision laid out by Sir Winston Churchill in Zurich in 1946, when he implored a Europe that had been ravaged by war to unite for the sake of peace. And he famously exclaimed, Mr. Speaker, that we should let Europe arise. The role of Great Britain, he said, Mr. Speaker, should be as a friend and sponsor of the new Europe. And
We must be its champion and champion its rights to live and to shine. That positive vision, Mr. Speaker, still applies today, and that should guide our relations with our European friends in the future. And more than that, Mr. Speaker, it should guide our relations with countries beyond Europe, and it should guide our role on the world stage. More than ever before, in the new era, Mr. Speaker, we must be more confident, more positive, more international and more global than ever before. And we should be confident in the ability of British commerce, British culture, British diplomacy and British law to have a far-reaching, highly positive impact around the world. But to do that, Mr. Speaker, we must make the first step of achieving the prize of Brexit. And the first step, Mr. Speaker, is passing this withdrawal agreement, and I will be supporting this tonight.
Thank you. Joanna Cherry.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister wondered what the history books will make of all of this. I'd like to venture a few suggestions. She will be remembered as the Prime Minister who has presided over the biggest failure of government and leadership in the United Kingdom in modern times.
Hear, hear.
Instead of having the moral courage to face up to the fact that the EU referendum was won on the back of lies and fraud, she has instead set out to achieve the unachievable, a deal better than the deal we currently enjoy. In doing so, she has ignored the weight of expert evidence. She has ignored the economic assessments of her own government and advisers. And she has presided over a regime so incompetent and questionable that no deal government contracts are being awarded without competitive tendering to dubious entities without any legal justification whatsoever. And she spent hundreds of thousands of pounds on taxpayers' money trying to prevent us from knowing the answer to the question of whether Article 50 could be unilaterally revoked. She barely has the confidence of her own party, and they only put up with her because none of them have the gumption to step up to the plate to sort out this mess. It's likely that she soon won't have the confidence of this House, and in Scotland she's never had our confidence and she never will. She should not take the Scots for fools. The majority of us voted to remain, and the majority of Scots now realise that they were lied to during the 2014 independence referendum. Those lies, Mr. Speaker, were that Scotland was an equal partner and that the only way to guarantee staying in the EU was to vote to stay in the UK. The results of referendums won on the back of lies cannot stand, and that's why I'm voting down this deal. I want a second EU referendum, and there should also be a second Scottish independence referendum.
Mike Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I plan to support Amendment Q this evening because the safeguards sought on the backstop are necessary and supported by a substantial number of members. However, I shall now be voting for the similar amendment tabled by my honourable friend for Basildon and Billericay. I arrived in Westminster yesterday expecting to resign today as a PPS to vote against the motion. Whilst there is much to support in the withdrawal agreement and future partnership, under a prolonged backstop, we couldn't take back the control that I campaigned for in the referendum and the 71% of my constituents in Dudley South voted for. That hasn't changed. It still worries me. However, I've concluded that there is now a much greater threat to Brexit that my constituents voted for. Events over the past week show that there are some in this House who will stop at little to frustrate Brexit, leaving no convention and no established practice of this House safe. I cannot risk those who have never accepted the referendum result stealing the Brexit that my constituents and voters around the country voted for in record numbers. My constituents aren't stupid. They weren't misled. They knew that they were voting to take back control over our laws, our borders, our trade and our money. They knew it wouldn't be plain sailing, but they knew it was a battle worth fighting. They expect us to deliver. I don't expect this motion to pass tonight, and so the government must listen to genuine concerns across this House, and the deal that it comes back to this House with must genuinely take back the control that people voted for in 2016. I will support that work starting tonight in this evening's vote.
It's the last chance and our best chance we have to deliver on the promise of Brexit, and our democracy desperately needs it to succeed.
Thank you. Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is the last day of my 20s, and as I reflect back on the last decade, I have to wonder, how did I end up here? And how did the country end up here in this almighty fancle, frankly? And it seems to me that the root cause of a lot of our problems in this country is one of economic alienation. Economic alienation caused by a crisis of neoliberalism, one that has failed the poorest people in our society. And we try to identify the root cause of a lot of the problems that erupted in the vote of so many people in this country to leave the European Union, and also looking back as a veteran of 2 referendum campaigns of so many people voting to leave the United Kingdom as well. It can only be, in my opinion, put down to the fact that the established structures in this country have failed to deliver prosperity and security for so many people in our country. When I look at my own constituency, where only 51% of people participated in the EU referendum, it seems to me that many people have disengaged with the political process entirely. And that is something that we have to take cognizance of in this House if we're really going to repair the trust in our political system between those who vote for us as representatives in this place and the body politic at large in this country, who in many cases have disengaged with our political process. Simply by talking about a deal, talking about no deal, isn't going to heal that rift in our democracy. We have to have a much greater and more thoughtful approach to how we heal this division in our society and how we do it. And I don't think that the Prime Minister, who has just joined us, is equipped to do that, and she's failed miserably in her efforts and her partisan approach in delivering this deal. We must adapt and deliver for the young people of this country, including myself, who have to face the future of the consequences of this action of this House and this Prime Minister. She must rise to the occasion, and so far she has failed miserably to do so.
Kirsten Hare.
The British people directed us to take the United Kingdom out of the European Union, and it is our duty to put that to effect. We must not tell them to vote again until they give a different answer, or deliver a non-Brexit that keeps in the EU in all but name. There are clear opportunities and we must embrace them. No parliamentarian is 100% comfortable with what's in front of us. That was inevitable for a whole host of reasons, including no clear direction for the outcome of a Leave vote. But too often self-interest takes over the decision-making process, with the SNP determined to force a no-deal situation in the hope that that would accelerate their case for independence. Myself and my fellow Scottish Conservative MPs and I have always been robust when it comes to our support for the fishing industry. No one can say that that industry has not been pragmatic when it comes to our departure from the EU. Whatever happens today, let me be clear that I will not accept any extension of the transition period beyond December 2020, because we must embrace the sea of opportunity that Brexit presents to them.
Right.
I also had concerns around the Northern Irish backstop, and it's with deep disappointment that we have not really reached a technological solution to date. I would have also felt much more comfortable with an end date on the establishment of a future economic partnership. But, Mr. Speaker, this decision for me is about my businesses, my constituents, those that I represent. A deal is a negotiation with a large dose of pragmatism, and having spoken to many of my largest employers, my constituents knocked on their doors and stood in the supermarket, what they want is uncertainty removed. Mr. Speaker, the withdrawal agreement may not be perfect, but it does deliver on the decision. Does it deliver on the decision taken by the people of our United Kingdom in 2016? Yes. Does it return full control of our borders, as so many people wished? Yes. Does it provide long-term stability for businesses, our farmers and our fishermen? Yes. And of all the options on the table, this agreement is the one with the most in the national interest. Mr. Speaker, I believe that it is, and that's why I'll be supporting the deal tonight.
Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to follow the member for Angus for a thoughtful speech, albeit one whose thrust I must say I cannot agree with. Over 2,000 of my constituents in Oxford East have contacted me about this deal, and only a handful say they support it. And I agree with them. I can't support it for 4 reasons. First of all, it gives inadequate protection for our EU citizens who are our neighbours, our friends and our workmates. I see the Prime Minister looking at me, but she will know that I have had a repeated communication with her and the Secretary of State over many, many weeks trying to get confirmation over the exact criteria for settled status. We still don't have that clarity that we need, and that's now coupled with an arbitrary salary level for those coming to our country for the EU, which will starve our hospitals and our universities and many other employers of the staff they desperately need. I can't support it because of that. Secondly, I can't support it because of inadequate plans in that deal for research cooperation into the future, so essential for the two universities and my constituency. Third, I can't support it because of insufficient certainty on customs. Huge firms, very important manufacturers like BMW Cowley in my constituency, they don't just need certainty for 2 years, they need it for 20, and they certainly won't get it from this deal. And finally, there are no legally binding guarantees in this deal to stop a race to the bottom on environmental standards or working rights. This deal has got to be voted down, and after such a failure of leadership, this government must go. If it won't, then all options should be on the table, including a third public vote, to find a way forward for our country. But whatever the process, all of us parliamentarians here need to remember we're the ones who have power. We have power, not those vulnerable people affected by the politics of hate out in our country. We have that responsibility, and we must always reject that hate. The onus is on us. Thank you.
There's a peculiar irony, Mr. Speaker, isn't there, to the fact that today marks the anniversary in 1535 of Henry VIII styling himself supreme head of the English Church. 500 years on, here we are arguing over the same questions of who rules, on what authority.
Just stop the clock. Order. Order. The unseemly atmosphere. The honourable gentleman must and will be heard. Alex Burkhardt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. 500 years on, we find ourselves still arguing about our relationship with Europe and who rules. I have little confidence that 500 years from now we will have resolved these questions. Tonight, and in the weeks to come, the House has three choices it can make. There can be a deal, there can be no deal, or we can stay in the European Union. If it is not this deal, then it must be another deal, and by all the rumours going round, that deal will be worse than the one on the table. It will keep us more closely aligned to the EU and give us less say. In fact, it will be worse than staying in the EU. Those people who want the House who want to stay in the EU hide behind the idea of a second referendum. Well, those honourable members who think the first referendum was divisive, goodness me, they haven't seen anything yet. It is time, if those members in the House who want us to stay in the EU believe it, they should call on this House to have a vote to revoke Article 50. But they won't do that. So the deal before us is what we have. And this is a deal which, treated right and taken in the right direction, will give us control of our borders, our laws, our waters and our trading opportunities. We have had time enough to go over these issues. It is time now for the House to make a decision. I will vote for the deal for tonight, and let's move on.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't come into Parliament to spend my time working on the future of the European Union. It's not what my constituents, when they elected me first in 2010, intended me to spend my time on either. They wanted me to concentrate on their living standards, their security, the future for their children and grandchildren, and a better planet for the future of our world. But actually, all of these things are encompassed in the decision we make tonight about whether or not we accept the deal that is before us, and about our commitment to our ongoing relationship with our European Union neighbours. And I will not vote for a deal that will make my constituents poorer, that will make them less secure, that will mean that we have less influence in decisions that are taken that will affect them, and that will reduce our standing, our highly respected and highly regarded standing in the world. I am
distressed as all honourable members are at the divisions that this Brexit story has revealed, opened up in our country. But our duty now is to concentrate on healing them. And I do not believe it will ever be possible to do that if we deliberately make our country poorer and more unstable and less influential than it would otherwise have been. We need to concentrate on building a positive, prosperous, powerful future for this nation. Voting to leave the EU and voting for the Prime Minister's way of leaving tonight will not enable us to do so.
That woman! Mr. Speaker, mine is the constituency that voted more than any other to leave the European Union in 2016. If we do not give back control of our laws, borders and money, it will be hard to say that this country is a democracy. The people in 2016 heard all the apocalyptic predictions that we now hear about WTO, and they made a choice. And in part, the country did that because Parliament had, rightly or wrongly, come to be seen as out of touch with the people on a host of issues. If we don't deliver what the people voted for, we will prove them right, and we will damage a democracy further in which people already lack faith. So how do we get there? It is clear that this House does not want to back a no-deal departure. It has already been clear that people on both sides of this House will vote to stop it. So I say to those of my constituents who have called me a traitor and worse that when I vote with the Prime Minister tonight, I do so because I am committed to Brexit, and voting against this deal puts winds in the sails of those who seek to stop it. Those people have had too much success already. Voting against this deal will not bring about a harder Brexit. It will bolster this House's dangerous attempts to undermine it. Those who say no deal is in law and will happen, I say to them, this House will rewrite that law. I am voting tonight for the only way out of this conundrum, a necessary gateway, however painful it might be. There is a risk that we get stuck in the backstop, but it is now smaller than the risk of not leaving at all. We in Parliament are better than letting the people down. We deserve to get on with it, to deliver this Brexit, and we should, like it or not in many cases, support this deal tonight.
I am going to be incredibly parochial. In the general election of 2017, my personal manifesto to the voters of North Dorset said, and I quote, "I am working for a Brexit right for North Dorset that will support business, protect jobs and workers' rights, promote local farming, safeguard the environment and give opportunities for our young." Having reviewed the deal, I am confident that it meets those commitments and the referendum decision to leave. We live, as we know, in a representative democracy where the voters of North Dorset send me to Westminster to exercise my judgment and support the policies of the Conservative government. I do not, and none of us do, possess the judgment of Solomon. All I can try and do is to assure them that I am trying to do my best for them and for our country. And I am conscious that in so doing I will not please everyone, but I do not think that is the purpose of politics. I'm a Democrat. I voted Remain and my side lost. The referendum was not, as we know, our finest hour. The majority of the House has made clear that it would support the decision and Parliament would deliver it. I maintain that view. A second referendum is fool's gold. Our country's use of referenda is on constitutional issues, and Brexit is now an issue of domestic policy. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has worked, if I may say so, her fingers to the bone to get this deal right. It has my full and unequivocal support. To deliver Brexit, to maintain and build the faith in our democracy, this House should stop the posturing and support my right honourable friend in the lobby tonight.
The UK is to leave the EU. That decision was taken 2 years ago. The question is whether we crash out or support the withdrawal agreement, be followed by the period of transition and the future arrangements on trade and relationships. Assuming we're not trying to reverse the referendum, and there isn't a majority, I think, either in the country or in the House for that, the majority of us support the Prime Minister's deal. The majority of Conservative supporters support that. I suspect the majority of Labour supporters support that. And other parties, given a choice, including Northern Ireland, would as well. Our responsibility is to find where there's an overlap between what's possible and what's right. I believe that the negotiated agreement on withdrawal is that position. For the opposition, to be reasonably polite, they seem to resemble members of the Scarabaei family who are upside down, pushing in the wrong direction, don't quite know where they're going. If the choice for the country is between chaos and compromise, I think this agreement is the right way of being sensible, and I back the plan in the national interest.
Thank you.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This has been a vitally important debate for the future of our country and our future relationship with the European Union, following the decision of the people in the 2016 referendum. The debate today is the culmination of one of the most chaotic and extraordinary parliamentary processes I've ever experienced in my 35 years as a member of this House. Parliament has held the government in contempt for the first time ever for failing to publish their legal advice. Then, for the first time in a generation or more, on the 10th of December, a government failed to move its own business in the House. The government has been defeated on a vote in its own finance bill for the first time since the 1970s. The Prime Minister opened the debate on her deal more than 1 month ago, a debate that was due to end on the 11th of December, but she pulled it in a panic. As she herself conceded, it would have been rejected by a significant margin. She has run down the clock in a cynical attempt to strong-arm members into backing her deal. Despite her promises, she's failed to negotiate any changes to her deal with Europe. No wonder the Prime Minister has suddenly discovered the importance of trade unions. She voted to clip their wings in the 2016 Trade Union Act, and she's utterly failed to convince them she has anything to offer Britain's workforce. And this, Mr. Speaker, is the heart of the matter. The Prime Minister has treated Brexit as a matter for the Conservative Party rather than the good of the country. But she's failed to win over even her own party. Many Conservative members who voted Remain are opposed to this deal, as are dozens of Conservative members who voted Leave. After losing her majority in the 2017 general election, the Prime Minister could have engaged with members across this House. She could have listened to the voices of trade unions. And if she had been listening, both businesses and trade unions would have told her they wanted a comprehensive and permanent customs union to secure jobs and trade. The decision to rule out a new customs union with a British say and the lack of certainty in the deal risks business investment being deferred on an even greater scale, threatening jobs and threatening living standards. Or even worse, it risks many companies relocating abroad, taking jobs and investment with them. Mr. Speaker, many workers know exactly this situation because they are facing this reality now. Their jobs are at risk, and they know their jobs are at risk. Both the First Ministers of Wales and Scotland have also made clear to the Prime Minister their support for a customs union to protect jobs and the economy. This deal fails to provide any certainty about future trade. It fails to guarantee our participation in European agencies and initiatives,
Losing this cooperation undermines our security, denies our citizens opportunity and damages our industries. Mr. Speaker, the withdrawal agreement is, in short, a reckless leap in the dark. It takes this country no closer to understanding our post-Brexit future, and neither does the future partnership document. Under this deal, in December 2020, we will be faced with a choice: either pay more and extend the transition period, or lock us into the backstop. At that point, the UK would be over a barrel. We would have left the EU, have lost the UK rebate, and be forced to pay whatever was demanded. Alternatively, the backstop would come into force, an arrangement with which there is no time limit or endpoint. It locks Britain into a deal from which it cannot leave without the agreement of the EU. And as my friend, the member for Holborn and St Pancras, has pointed out on so many occasions, this is unprecedented in British history. The last 2 years gives us no confidence that this government can do a deal in under 2 years. So at some point before December 2020, the focus would then inevitably shift from negotiations on the future relationship to negotiations on an extension to the transition period, including negotiations on what further payments we should make to the European Union. The vague partnership document says, and I quote, "It can lead to a spectrum of different outcomes as well as checks and controls." That doesn't show to me any clarity whatsoever in that document. And there is not even any mention of the famed frictionless trade that was promised in the Chequers proposals. The former Brexit secretary, that's one of the former Brexit secretaries, promised a detailed, precise and substantive document. The government spectacularly failed to deliver it. So, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm this, that Labour will vote against this deal tonight. And, Mr. Speaker, Labour will vote against it because it's a bad deal for this country. And as we have heard over the past week, members in all parties, including many in the Conservative Party, will join us in rejecting this botched and damaging deal. And I welcome the fact there is a clear majority to reject any no-deal outcome. The amendment to the Finance Bill last week demonstrated the will of the House on rejecting the danger, and it is a danger, of a no-deal outcome that would cause such chaos to so many people across this country. But, Mr. Speaker, it's not enough for the House to vote against the deal before us and against no deal. We also have to be for something. So, Mr. Speaker, in the coming days, it is vital that this House has the opportunity to debate and vote on the way forward, to consider all the options available. The overwhelming majority of the House voted to respect the result of the referendum and therefore voted to trigger Article 50. So I say this to our negotiating partners in the European Union. If Parliament votes down this deal, then reopening negotiations should not and cannot be ruled out. We understand why, after 2 frustrating years of negotiations, this I'm saying to the European Union, you would want this resolved. But this Parliament, our Parliament here, has only one duty: to represent the interests of the people of this country, and the deal negotiated by the government does not meet the needs of the people of this country. The people of Britain, including many European Union nationals who have made their lives here, these are people who've contributed to our country, have contributed to our economy and to our public services, including our National Health Service. And those people are now anxious and have no faith in this government to manage the process of settled status fairly or efficiently. And the early pilots of the scheme are very far from encouraging. The Prime Minister claimed that this is a good deal. And so confident was she of that she refused to publish the government's legal advice. But her government's own economic assessment clearly tells us it is a bad deal. It's a product, Mr. Speaker, of 2 years of botched negotiations, in which the government spent more time arguing with itself and in its own cabinet than it did in negotiating with the European Union. It's not only on Brexit that they have failed. Under this government, Mr. Speaker, more people are living in poverty, including... Mr. Speaker, I'm talking of the poverty of 500,000 more children who've been moved into poverty while this government's been in office. I'm also talking of those that have been forced into rough sleeping and homelessness, which has risen every year. Too many people are stuck in low-paid and insecure work. Too many people are struggling to make ends meet and falling deeper and deeper into personal debt on credit cards and loan sharks. Nothing in this Brexit deal and nothing on offer from this government will solve that. That is why Labour believes that a general election would be the best outcome for the country. If this deal is rejected tonight, we need, Mr. Speaker, to keep in mind that the vast majority of the people of this country don't think of themselves as Remainers or Leavers. Whether they voted Leave or Remain 2.5 years ago, all of them, are concerned about their future, and it's their concerns this House must be able to answer and meet. So, Mr. Speaker, I hope that tonight this House votes down this deal, and then we move to a general election. So the people, Mr. Speaker,
Order. Nobody's going to shout the right honourable gentleman down, just as nobody will shout the Prime Minister down. All they're doing by causing me to intervene is taking time away. Not necessary, rather foolish, thoroughly counterproductive. Jeremy Corbyn.
So, Mr. Speaker, the people need to be able to take back control, and a general election would give them the opportunity to decide who their MPs were, who their government was, and who was negotiating on their behalf. And it would give that new government a mandate, and the mandate that is needed to break the deadlock that has been brought to this House by this government. But first, Mr. Speaker, I ask this of the House. Vote against this deal. Vote against this deal because we've had a very long and very detailed debate in this House. More members have spoken in this debate than almost any other debate I can remember. They've given a heartfelt analysis of this deal. And a very large number have said why they will vote against this deal. Quite simply, Mr. Speaker, this deal is bad for our economy a bad deal for our democracy and a bad deal for this country. I ask the House tonight to do the right thing. Reject this deal. Reject this deal because of the harm it would do, and show that we as MPs are speaking up for the people that we represent, who recognise this deal is dangerous for this country and bad for them, their living standards, and for our collective future.
Mr. Speaker, this debate has lasted some 8 days, over 54 hours, with speeches of powerful sincerity from over 200 honourable and right honourable members. It has been historic for our Parliament and for our country. We have heard contributions from every perspective, looking at all aspects of this complex and vital question. We've seen this House at its most passionate and vigorous, and I thank everyone who has contributed. No one watching this debate can be in any doubt about the strength of this House of Commons as the fulcrum of our democracy. This is a debate about our economy and security, the livelihoods of our constituents, and the future for our children and for generations to come. It goes to the heart of our Constitution, and no one should forget that it is a democratic process that has got us to where we are today. In 2015, my party stood on an election manifesto that had as a centrepiece the promise of an in-out referendum on the UK's membership of the European Union. The British people responded by electing a Conservative government to follow through on that promise. That is what we did when this House voted overwhelmingly to hold the referendum and put the choice in the hands of the British people. Indeed, 470 current members voted in favour of it, and only 32 opposed it. That campaign was keenly fought. It caught the public imagination like few campaigns before it. Turnout was 72%, higher than for any national poll for a quarter of a century. And while not overwhelming, the result was clear and it was decisive. Something this House accepted when we voted overwhelmingly to trigger Article 50. 436 current members voted to do so, only 85 opposed. Parliament gave the people a choice. We set the clock ticking on our departure. And tonight, we will determine whether we move forward with a withdrawal agreement that honours the vote and sets us on course for a better future. The responsibility of each and every one of us at this moment is profound, for this is an historic decision that will set the future of our country for generations. So what are the alternatives that present themselves? First, we could decide it's all too difficult and give up, either by revoking Article 50 or passing the back buck to the British people in a second referendum. But I believe we have a duty to deliver on the democratic decision of the British people, and to do so in a way that brings our country together. A second referendum would lead instead to further division. There'd be no agreement to the question, let alone the answer. It would say to the people we were elected to serve that we were unwilling to do what they had instructed. Now, the second possible outcome is that we leave on the 29th of March without a deal. But I don't believe that's what the British people voted for, because they were told that if they voted to leave, they could still expect a good trading relationship with the European Union. And neither would it be the best outcome. Our deal delivers certainty for businesses, with a time-limited implementation period to prepare for the new arrangements of the future relationship. No deal means no implementation period. Our deal protects the rights of EU citizens living in the UK and UK citizens living in the EU, so they can carry on their lives as before. No deal means no reciprocal agreement to protect those citizens' rights. Our deal delivers the deepest security partnership in the EU's history, so our police and security services can continue to work together with their European partners to keep all our people safe. No deal means no such security partnership. And our deal delivers the foundations for an unprecedented economic relationship with the EU that is more ambitious, that is...
I said earlier it was becoming really rather a noisy and unseemly atmosphere, and that has now resumed. It must stop. The Prime Minister must be heard. The Prime Minister.
Our deal delivers the foundations for an unprecedented economic relationship with the EU that is more ambitious than anything they have ever entered into with a third country. It will give us the benefits of trading with the European Union and the ability to forge new trade deals in our own right. No deal means those new trade deals come at the expense of a trade deal with Europe, not in addition to it. So while it is categorically wrong to suggest that our country could not ultimately make a success of no deal, it is equally wrong to suggest that this is the best outcome. Now, third, there is the path advocated by the Leader of the Opposition, and we've heard it again, of calling a general election. But today's vote is not about what's best for the Leader of the Opposition. It is about what is best for the country. And at the end of a general election, whatever the result, the choices facing us will not have changed. It will still be no Brexit, leaving with no deal, or leaving with a deal. And there's no guarantee that an election would make the parliamentary arithmetic any easier. All it would gain is 2 more months of uncertainty and division. In 2017, the two main parties both stood on manifestos that pledged to deliver the result of the referendum. They got over 80% of the vote. People had the opportunity to vote for a second referendum by supporting the Liberal Democrats in 2017. Just 7% of voters did so. It is the job of Parliament to deliver on the promises made at the last election, not to be seeking a new one. Now, some suggest there's a fourth option, to agree that we should leave with a deal on the 29th of March, but to vote this deal down in the hope of going back to Brussels again and negotiating an alternative deal. But no such alternative deal exists. The political declaration sets the framework for the future relationship, and the next phase of negotiations will be our chance to shape that relationship. But we cannot begin those talks unless or until we agree the terms of our withdrawal. And the European Union will not agree to any other deal for that withdrawal. So, having ruled out all of these options, we're left with one: to vote for this deal tonight. One that delivers on the core tenets of Brexit, taking back control of our borders, laws, money, trade and fisheries, but in a way that protects jobs, ensures our security and honours the integrity of our United Kingdom. One that strikes a fair balance between the hopes and desires of all our fellow citizens, those who voted to leave and those who voted to stay in. And if we leave with the deal I'm proposing, I believe we can lay the foundations from which to build a better Britain. And as Prime Minister, I would not stand at this dispatch box and recommend a course of action that I do not believe is in the best interests of our country and our future. And there are differences in this House today, but I believe we can come together as we go forwards. And let me reassure anyone who's in any doubt whatsoever, the government will work harder at taking Parliament with us. And as we move on to the next phase of negotiations, we will be looking to work with Parliament to seek that consensus. But, Mr. Speaker, let me turn to the most contentious element of our deal, the Northern Ireland Protocol.
My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, knows that what concerns many of us is the possibility of the permanent nature of the Northern Ireland backstop. may I refer her to my Amendment B on the order paper, which sets a deadline for that backstop, and may I ask her what is the attitude of the government to my amendment?
Can I thank my right honourable friend for the question he's asked and for the work that he has been doing to try to find a way through on this particular issue, and I know he's spent a long time consulting with international lawyers on this issue. The government isn't able to accept the amendment that has been selected, that my right honourable friend has put down, that has been selected tonight, because we have a different opinion and a different interpretation of the Vienna Convention. But I note that my right honourable friend has put down an alternative At the time, all parties, all those campaigning in that referendum were absolutely clear that whatever the decision of that referendum, it would be respected by government and by Parliament. And I believe that we have a duty to deliver on that referendum vote, and to do so in a way that does protect people's jobs and protects our security and protects our union. A vote against this deal is a vote for nothing more than uncertainty, division, and the very real risk of no deal or no Brexit at all. And it doesn't have to be that way. Tonight we can choose certainty over uncertainty. We can choose unity over division. We can choose to deliver on our promise to the British people, not break that promise and endanger trust in politics for a generation. Because as members of Parliament, we have a duty to serve not our own self-interest nor that of our parties, but the people we were elected to represent. It is the people of this country that we were sent here to serve. The people of this country who queued up at polling stations, who cast their ballots so they might put their faith in us. It is the people of this country who entrusted us with the sacred right to build for them and their children and grandchildren the brighter future they expect and deserve. And if we act in the national interest and back this deal tonight, then tomorrow we can begin to build that future together. If we act in the national interest and back this deal tonight, we can build a country that works for everyone. Together we can show the people we serve that their voices have been heard, that their trust was not misplaced, that our politics can and does deliver, that politicians can rise above our differences and come together to do what the people asked of us. That is the test history has set for us today. It will determine the future of our country for generations. We each have a solemn responsibility to deliver Brexit and take this country forward. And with my whole heart, I call on this House to discharge that responsibility together, and I commend this motion to the House.
Under the order of the House of the 4th of December and the 9th of January, I must now put the questions necessary to dispose of proceedings on the European Union withdrawal motion. As I explained the sequence earlier, it should now be familiar to colleagues. I begin by inviting Jeremy Corbyn, the Leader of the Opposition, to move Amendment A.
Mr. Speaker.
Not moved. I turn now to the second of the amendments, that in the name of the Leader of the Scottish National Party, Mr. Ian Blackford, Amendment K.
Not moved, Mr. Speaker.
Moved. Thank you. I turn to the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Gainsborough, to move, if he so wishes, Amendment B.
In view of the positive response from the PM, not moved.
Moved. Very well. And finally, I invite Mr. John Barron to move Amendment F.
I beg to move.
The question is that the amendment in the name of the Honourable Gentleman and of others, Amendment F, be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the noes have it. No? Is the Honourable Gentleman persisting? No? Persistence in order. I know what I'm doing. The key point is persistence. If the Honourable If the Honourable Gentleman wishes to press his amendment, he is entitled to do so. Oh, yes, he is. Oh, yes, he is. I'll be the judge of that. The question is that the amendment be made. I'll say it once more. As many as other opinions say aye. Of the contrary, no. The question is that Amendment F, as in F for Freddie, be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. Tellers for the ayes, Sir Mike Penning and Nigel Evans. Tellers for the noes, Wendy Morton and Ian Stewart. Lock the doors!
The ayes to the right were 24.
Goodness sake.
The noes to the left were 600.
The ayes to the right, 24. The noes to the left, 600. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. Thank you.
One more heave.
Order. I now put the main question to the House. The main question in the name of the Prime Minister. The question is the main motion in the name of the Prime Minister. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Division! Clear the lobby! The question is the main motion in the name of the Prime Minister. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Wendy Morton and Ian Stewart. Tellers for the noes, Vicky Foxcroft and Nick Smith. Order.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes, order. The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. Point of order. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the House has spoken and the government will listen. It is clear that the House does not support this deal, but tonight's vote tells us nothing about what it does support. Nothing about how or even if it intends to honour the decision the British people took in a referendum Parliament decided to hold. And people, particularly EU citizens who've made their home here, and UK citizens living in the EU, deserve clarity on these questions as soon as possible.
Order. There's no good people shouting. There will be an opportunity for other points of order, but the Prime Minister must and will be heard. The Prime Minister.
Those whose jobs rely on our trade with the EU need that clarity. So, with your permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to set out briefly how the government intends to proceed. First, we need to confirm whether this government still enjoys the confidence of the House. I believe that it does, but given the scale and importance of tonight's vote, it's right that others have the chance to test that question if they wish to do so. I can therefore confirm that if the official opposition table a confidence motion this evening in the form required by the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, the government will make time to debate that motion tomorrow. And if, as happened before Christmas, the official opposition declined to do so, we will, on this occasion, consider making time tomorrow to debate any motion in the form required from the other opposition parties, should they put one forward. Second, if the House confirms its confidence in this government, I will then hold meetings with my colleagues, our confidence and supply partner, the DUP, and senior parliamentarians from across the House to identify what would be required to secure the backing of the House. The government will approach these meetings in a constructive spirit, but given the urgent need to make progress, we must focus on ideas that are genuinely negotiable and have sufficient support in this House. Third, if these meetings yield such ideas, the government will then explore them with the European Union. Mr. Speaker, I want to end by offering two reassurances. The first is to those who fear that the government's strategy is to run down the clock to the 29th of March. That is not our strategy. I've always believed that the best way forward is to leave in an orderly way with a good deal, and have devoted much of the last 2 years negotiating such a deal. As you confirmed, Mr. Speaker, the amendment to the business motion tabled last week by my right honourable and learned friend, the member for Beaconsfield, is not legally binding, but the government respects the will of the House. We will therefore make a statement about the way forward and table an amendable motion by Monday. The second reassurance is to the British people who voted to leave the European Union in the referendum 2.5 years ago. I became Prime Minister immediately after that referendum. I believe it's my duty to deliver on their instruction, and I intend to do so. Every day that passes without this issue being resolved means more uncertainty, more bitterness and more rancour. The government has heard what the House has said tonight, but I ask members on all sides of the House to listen to the British people who want this issue settled and to work with the government to do just that.
I will come to other colleagues, but first of all, point of order, the Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The result of tonight's vote is the greatest defeat for a government since the 1920s in this House. This is a catastrophic defeat for this government. After 2 years of failed negotiations, the House of Commons has delivered its verdict on her Brexit deal, and that verdict is absolutely decisive. I hear the words of the Prime Minister, but actions of her government of the past 2 years speak equally clearly. She is only attempting to reach out now to try to keep her failed process and deal alive after it's been so roundly rejected by Parliament on behalf of the people of this country. Labour has laid out our priorities consistently. No deal must be taken off the table. A permanent customs union must be secured, and people's rights and protections must be guaranteed so they do not fall behind. At every turn, the Prime Minister has closed the door on dialogue. Businesses begged her to negotiate a comprehensive customs union. Trade union leaders pressed her for the same thing. They were ignored. In the last 2 years, she's only had one priority: the Conservative Party. Her governing principle of delay and denial has reached the end of the line. She cannot seriously believe that after 2 years of failure, she is capable of negotiating a good deal for the people of this country. The most important issue facing us is that the government has lost the confidence of this House and this country. I therefore, Mr. Speaker, inform you I have now tabled a motion of no confidence in this government. And I'm pleased that motion will be debated tomorrow, so this House can give its verdict on the sheer incompetence of this government and pass that motion of no confidence in the government.
First of all, just come to the leader. I will come to the right honourable gentleman, of course, but a point of order, the Leader of the House.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I should like to make a short business statement regarding the business for tomorrow and the remainder of this week.
I'm extraordinarily grateful to the right honourable lady, and I accept that she can't be psychic as to what I'm thinking, and I can't be psychic as to what she's thinking. I think the smooth and orderly way to proceed with this matter is to deal with points of order first, and then to come to the right honourable lady's statement, which would be entirely proper and doubtless helpful to the House. Point of order, Mr. Ian Blackford.
Mr. Speaker, we should be aware of the situation that we're in. The clock is ticking. We have got very little time to resolve this. The fact that it has taken us so long to get to this point, frankly, is shameful. This is a humiliating defeat for the government. When I listen to the Prime Minister, it sounds like everybody else is at fault rather than her. She has to accept responsibility for what has happened this evening. Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted that the Leader of the Opposition has come round to a motion of no confidence. That should have happened before, but of course we will support it. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned, it is clear the clock is ticking. The government needs to secure the safety of all our nations and should immediately postpone the Article 50 process and should immediately have talks with all the leaders of the opposition parties. Let's work together in all our interests, but let's listen to the voices of the parliamentarians that have been sent here. There is no support for this deal. It mustn't come back again. The obvious thing to do, the right thing to do, suspend Article 50, put this to the people in a people's vote.
I know the right honourable gentleman won't take offence when I say he was using the device of a point of order, as is entirely understandable in these circumstances, to say what he wanted to say, but he was more interested in what he had to say to the House than in anything that I might have to say to him. It's not a matter for the Chair. The right honourable gentleman has registered his view, and these are the sorts of issues that can quite properly be aired in debate and quite conceivably in discussions that take place with the Prime Minister and other party leaders. But he's made his point with force and alacrity, and it's on the record for colleagues to study. I will take the Honourable Lady first, Right Honourable Lady first, and then others. Point of order, Jo Swinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With this result of a scale that is unprecedented in recent times, it is clear that this deal, nor any tweaks to it, will get through the House of Commons. So can I ask for your guidance, Mr. Speaker, on how Parliament can assert its authority to make sure that we can give the people of this country a say on this deal to resolve this matter? It is a mess that needs to be resolved by the people in a people's vote.
Well, my response to the Honourable Lady is as follows. First of all, there may well be an opportunity for her to air her own thoughts on that matter, the situation we face and the suggested way forward in the course of debate to which the Prime Minister in her point of order referred. There is that prospect potentially unfolding. So that's one opportunity for the Honourable Lady. And the second would be those discussions to take place in coming days. And I dare say that the Honourable Lady will want to take the chance to participate in those. More widely, where there is discussion about Parliament's role and what Parliament might do and what options Parliament might have, I think I can predict with complete confidence that the Honourable Lady will have a view about that, and that view, which is important, will be heard. And point of order, Mr. Angus Brendan McNeill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister spoke about the will of Parliament, Mr. Speaker, and I think we have to investigate that further. When can we test the will of this House on the choices that are now left? The choices are no deal versus revoking Article 50. Can we test these in the House? And bearing in mind, of course, that in Scotland the European Union is more popular in the polls than the United Kingdom, and the Prime Minister should know that.
There'll be plenty of opportunity for testing in the days ahead. I think can I just take the Honourable Lady first? Point of order, Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This isn't a political point of order. Yesterday it was raised the issue of the member for Hampstead and Kilburn and the fact that she should have been undergoing a caesarean section today for a high-risk pregnancy, and she is comfortable with me saying she has gestational diabetes and was asked by her medical team to undergo that at an early possibility. She has had to defer that despite the advice and comments that you made from the chair yesterday that apparently were given no comfort from the government benches. And I think this is shocking. And I have to say that as a doctor, to put our colleague at risk and her baby at risk because we cannot have a method of allowing those who are sick or pregnant is disgraceful.
Well, I note what the Honourable Lady says, and I don't cavil at it at all. I made the point yesterday, I thought the situation was lamentable. I used that word, I think, several times. The situation was lamentable. This matter, I'm not interested in people chuntering from a sedentary position to no obvious benefit or purpose. I'm ruling on the matter and I require no assistance in the process of doing so. The situation was lamentable. I thought it better that the Honourable Lady should have the opportunity of a proxy vote. That was my view, and it was a view widely shared. The matter was debated in February of last year and in September. I had indicated my strong support. It would have been necessary for a resolution to be tabled by the Leader of the House for reasons which others can explain. It's not my job to do their explaining for them. That has not happened. I think it's regrettable, but it cannot be sorted tonight. Nevertheless, she's registered her concern. It's a concern and a sense, frankly, of very deep disappointment, to put it mildly, that I share, and it will doubtless be dealt with in days or weeks to come. And my very great sympathies go to the Honourable Lady, the member for Hampstead and Kilburn, who, in my judgment, should not have been put in this position. Point of order, Yvette Cooper.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has now said that she will listen to voices from right across this House. She has obviously had 30 months in which to do that, and it has led to this defeat for the government tonight, which is the greatest for more than 100 years. We must all hope that she will indeed listen to voices from across the House, but we also all recognise that it will take time, and people and businesses and government organisations and institutions will now be worried that there are only just over 70 days left. The Prime Minister did not mention Article 50.
Order. People talk about respect in this House, but there's a Minister of the Crown shouting at the Right Honourable Member for Normanton. I say in the kindest way, he's normally a very genial fellow. Stop it. You're capable of much better than that. Yvette Cooper.
Given the scale of the challenge, with the clock now really ticking down, the Prime Minister did not mention what will happen to Article 50. Mr. Speaker, can you advise the House on what we might be able to do to urge the Prime Minister, for the sake of businesses and jobs and people across the country, to seek an immediate extension of Article 50 now so that this can be sorted out?
Well, the answer is, in the first instance, these are matters that can be aired in debate tomorrow. I don't think it's right for me tonight to give a ruling on what the Right Honourable Lady or others should or shouldn't do. She will be aware of the presentation of bill that took place in the name of another member who I believe also has views on these matters. These will be, I'm sure, discussed in the days ahead, not merely in private meetings, but I feel certain on the floor of the House. And of one thing I am sure: that which members wish to debate and which they determine shall be subject to a vote will be debated and voted upon. That seems to me so blindingly obvious that no sensible person would disagree with the proposition. If MPs want to debate a matter and to vote on it, that opportunity will, I'm sure, unfold in the period ahead. I think if there are no further points of order, and I don't think we need any, it is right that we hear the supplementary business statement by the Leader of the House.
I'm extraordinarily grateful, Mr. Speaker. With permission,
be honest. I don't really mind whether she's grateful or not, but she's got the chance. The Leader of the House.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I should like to make a short business statement regarding the business for tomorrow and the remainder of this week. Wednesday, the 16th of January, the House will be asked to consider a motion of no confidence in Her Majesty's Government under Section 2(4) of the Fixed Term Parliaments Act of 2011 in the name of the Leader of the Opposition. Thursday, the 17th of January, debate on a motion on mental health first aid in the workplace, followed by general debate on children's social care in England. The subjects for these debates were determined by the Backbench Business Committee. I shall make a further business statement in the usual way on Thursday. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Shadow Leader of the House, I remind the House that the supplementary business statement is subject to questioning, but its terms are comparatively narrow, and I implore members to recognise the implication and spirit of that fact. The Shadow Leader, Valerie Vaz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Leader of the House for the statement and say that the opposition concur with it in the circumstances of the vote. We agree with the debate tomorrow.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Pete Wishart.
Could just wonder, Mr. Speaker, whether you could find any way to confirm that the whole day's business tomorrow will be given to the vote of no confidence. According to the legislation that's set out in the Fixed Term Parliament Act, there's only a requirement for an hour and a half. I'm looking to the Leader of the House just to confirm that the whole day will be available. The Chief Whip is shaking his head, so I am sufficiently persuaded that that's going to be the case. So he's nodding his head, rather, so I'm satisfied that is the case, and the Leader of the House is just about to confirm that.
Yes, subject to the agreement of the House.
It would be useful to know the timings. I mean, ordinarily, the Chair is approached about these matters, which is the sensible way to deal with it, but we do need to know what the timing is, and I hope the Right Honourable Lady will either be able to advise now or to confer with colleagues later in the evening so that there is clarity on that matter. And then we'll be all very satisfied. The Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that your office has the proposal for a business motion tomorrow that proposes that the debate takes place for the whole day until 7 p.m.
Grateful, thank you. Point of order, thank you very much indeed. Supplementary business motion, Wes Streeting.
Mr. Speaker, I wasn't sure if we were taking questions on the business statement or points of order, but given the scale of the defeat, the government must surely have seen the inevitable coming. The issues for debate on Thursday are important, but every day wasted is another day closer to exit, particularly without a deal. Are we really debating two motions with no consequence on Thursday rather than deciding how we're going to move forward on a crucial issue facing our country?
The leader can add to what she said by way of the supplementary business statement if she likes. That seemed to me, if the honourable gentleman would forgive me saying so, a kind of curious hybrid between an attempted point of order on the one hand and a question on the supplementary business motion on the other. And I'm not sure if he had to plump for one or the other, which it would be. But what I would say to the honourable gentleman is that these matters can be aired in debate tomorrow, in the business question on Thursday, and in subsequent days. So I completely understand that the honourable gentleman is seized of the importance of early progress, but that opportunity will unfold in days to come, and I think I can predict with confidence that he'll be in his place, ready to leap to his feet to share his point of view with the House. Yes, is it really going to be necessary? Yeah, Simon Hall.
Mr. Speaker, could you confirm that the timetable set out by my right honourable friend, the Leader of the House, perfectly accords with the amended programme motion which the House voted upon last week, which I would guess that the honourable gentleman voted in favour of, which the Prime Minister would have 3 sitting days.
It wouldn't have been agreed if that weren't the case. I don't think it should be unkind to the honourable gentleman, but he's frankly not adding anything by that point of order, although I'm sure he perfectly well intended to do so, but no additional public service has been provided. If there are further questions to the Leader, I'm sure she'll be happy to take them within the confines of the supplementary business motion, but if not, I suggest to the House that we proceed to subsequent motions, namely, if memory serves me correctly, motion number 3 on energy conservation, the whip to move.
I beg to move.
Oh, well, I'm sure the House wants to hear about the energy conservation motion. The question is as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The division is deferred until tomorrow. Motion number 4 on exiting the European Union, brackets nuclear safeguards, close brackets, the whip to move, thank you. The question is as on the order paper in respect of motion 4. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. And motion number 5 entitled Rating and Valuation.
I beg to move.
The question is as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motion number 6, colleagues, on UK participation in the EU Agency for Criminal Justice Cooperation, brackets Eurojust, close brackets, post-adoption opt-in decision, the whip to move. Thank you. The question is as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Aye. Oh, the division is deferred until tomorrow. Thank you, colleagues. We come now to the adjournment, the whip to move.
I beg to move this House to now adjourn.
Thank you. The question is that this House do now adjourn. Mr. Kevin Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On this historic night, I'm sorry that members are leaving, would not be listening to the problems that my constituency are facing at Chester Street railway station. But I'm pleased, Mr. Speaker, that I've secured this debate to highlight the problems my constituency in Chester Street and the surrounding areas who use the station are having.
How did you get this?
Tonight we've been consumed by the debate on Brexit, but it is, I think, Mr. Speaker, worth reminding ourselves that other issues are important to our constituents, and despite our very serious deliberations today, our constituents, many are just getting on with their lives. Now, Mr. Speaker, Chester Street Railway Station serves not only the town of Chester Street, but the surrounding villages and communities of North Durham. My constituency, as people may well know, borders the Tyneside conurbation. Now, over the years, traditional industries in Chester Street and large parts of my North Durham constituency have moved and closed,
and the area now has become a commuter town for both North Tyneside, north of the Tyne, and also parts of Durham and Teesside. So therefore, Mr. Speaker, good transport links are important to the economic viability of my constituency. In Durham County Council's new economic plan, the transport links for the north of the county are highlighted as an important part of that part of the County Durham's economic future. Now, the journey time to Newcastle from Chester Street and south to Durham is less than 10 minutes. So in many cases, in many ways, it's an attractive commuter option for people to live in my constituency and work either on Tyneside, down in Teesside, or in Durham. And for many reasons, that's why people have located themselves in the Chester Street and the surrounding areas. The main rail service in the morning and in the evenings are provided by three operators, TransPennine Express, Northern and cross country. But since May of last year, the main problem has been reliability of services, particularly by TransPennine. Not only have trains been late, but on very often occasions they have been cancelled altogether. Now these are particularly difficult for people at the two main commuter times. First thing in the morning, when people are keen to get to work at 9 o'clock, and also get home in the evenings. And those commuters have often found themselves either late for work because the trains have been cancelled, or in the evenings stuck either in Newcastle or other stations further south with no ability to get home. In some cases, people not being able to get home until 7 o'clock and later in the evenings. Now, Mr. Speaker, because of the concern that many of my constituents have who rely on the Chester Street Railway Station for their main commute to work, I called a public meeting in November. And I think, Mr. Speaker, it is useful, I think, to just highlight some of the comments that were made, not only at that meeting, but in the numerous emails and correspondence I've received from concerned constituents. First one was, in summary, this week, Chester Street to Darlington commuter train has been cancelled 7 out of 10 times. The service, another constituent said, the service continues to go from bad to worse, with morning services having been totally cancelled 3 out of 4 days in the last week. Another constituent, a working mother, said that she was finding it difficult to hold down a senior executive job in Newcastle as it became untenable for her to regularly miss pre-arranged pick-up times for her children from school because she was stuck in Newcastle Central Station following trains being cancelled in the evenings. Another constituent writes, the 8:24 commuter train from Chester Street to Durham has been cancelled yet again, late for work. Another said, how can the region be taken seriously if our trains aren't on time 50% of the time? Another said, while financial compensation does indeed help, it does not compensate for the trouble that working parents have caused to them by the delays in train and their childcare responsibilities. I've got other constituents who have raised the issue not only just about childcare, but those looking after elderly relatives that in the evenings are finding it very difficult to get home from Newcastle. So it would not be a gym.
I think for giving way, he's always very generous, and I am here to support him as I am with others when it comes to debates. I understand in my research that I did on the subject matter, which the honourable gentleman is referring to, that the idea for the trains is to take people away from cars and buses. But unfortunately, in this instance, there also seems to be the incident, I think you referred to it earlier on, and that's the issue of not getting onto the trains whenever they come into the station. Does the Honourable Gentleman feel that one way of addressing the issue of overcrowding in trains is to produce a longer train, which we know from our history and usage over here in the mainland, and does he feel that's an option?
Well, it is, and I think the Honourable Gentleman does raise an interesting point, is that this should be a way of getting people out of their cars and off other forms of transport into Tyneside and down into Durham and Teesside. But and I accept that one option would be to have longer trains, but if the trains aren't turned up in the first place, that is the problem. So, Mr. Speaker, these delays and cancellations are causing real hardship to many of my constituents. I even had one constituent contacted me a few weeks ago saying he turned down a promotion at work because he couldn't guarantee to his employer that he was actually going to get in on time. So, these are real-life situations that are causing a lot of hardship to my constituents. I certainly will.
I think my honourable friend and near neighbour is actually outlining quite clearly that the Northern Rail franchise is a failed franchise. The service that they're giving to the people of the North East, the North West and Yorkshire and Humberside is frankly disastrous. Everyone knows that it is, and yet they're allowed to get away with this nonsense and actually put constituents of my honourable friend and many others in jeopardy of losing their jobs because of a shoddy service.
Well, I don't disagree with my honourable friend, but this is an economic case because we are losing the ability of people to access the jobs that there are on both Tyneside and down into Teesside and into Durham. And the other point is, which I think this is why a lot of constituents feel hopeless, is that what can government do about it? And I think he raised an interesting point about the franchise itself and how it is actually operating. And I think whatever, and I'll mention it later on, whatever we do about in terms of the franchise, it does actually need tightening up in terms of the penalties. The other issue facing my constituents, Mr. Speaker, is the issue that when trains are cancelled, clearly the trains that do turn up are then overcrowded. Now, it is only a short distance, small distance commute, but we've had situations where people have been unable to get on later trains. I also had a constituent who was travelling further afield to York and had booked his journey some 3 months in advance and booked her an actual seat, but suffering, and he did that because he was suffering from a bad back and travelling with a friend for a day out in York who was suffering from cancer and had to stand all the way from Chester Street to York, and that, I've got to say, cannot be acceptable. Now, in terms of the issues that have been affecting the regularity of services to Chester Street, yes, some are directly related to the timetable, and there has been quite rightly a lot of publicity around the issues in Manchester and Leeds. But what's happening is a lot of the congestion and issues there are having a knock-on effect further north, because the companies are then cancelling trains and ensuring that they may go to York but go no further north, and likewise cancelling them all together. And the chaos around the Manchester and Leeds area has been well publicised. But what I ask of the Minister, and certainly ask of the operators, is the north is further north than Leeds and Manchester, and the community, the people that rely on this service in my constituency shouldn't be sacrificed for just making sure that they can get their times right in Manchester and Leeds. The other, I think, frustration on my constituents' part is being TransPennines' appalling way of dealing with customers. Certainly in the evenings when trains are cancelled in travelling south from Newcastle to Chesley Street, there's no information given to the stranded commuters, no alternatives offered in terms of other ways of getting home, and a situation whereby people are just left to make their own way or make alternative provision. But when that's on a regular basis, and if you have got childcare responsibilities, or, as I know one constituent particularly has got an elderly mother she has to care for, then that is not acceptable. Arriving home after 7 o'clock in the evening when you're expected to be there at 5:15, I don't think is very... And that lack of information, and I've raised this with TransPennine, but they again seem to be... There's even no staff, for example, at Newcastle to give information to or provide alternative forms of transport, whether it be replacement buses or alternative train options. The other, I think, issue is around compensation. Now, clearly in terms of compensation, there is a compensation scheme, but again, TransPennine are not good at advertising the fact that people are entitled to compensation. And I think as a one-off goodwill gesture, TransPennine should offer all regular travellers a month's free travel, because people like to put up for this for far too long. And I'd be interested to know whether the Minister has any powers to intercede in making sure that TransPennine do pay a reasonable compensation to people. But I can kind of come back to the point raised by my honourable friend from Gateshead. Is the issue is about this franchise. It is clearly not working, and certainly I think TransPennine either need to up their game and start acting like a organisation which is caring about its customers, or this franchise should be taken off them. And it's certainly, if we are going for refranchising, it should be looked at in detail how appallingly they've operated it so far. Now, the situation of where Chester Street is located should be travelling by train should be an ideal opportunity for people to access jobs, as I say, around our region. But if you've got inconsistent service, then this is not going to endear people. And certainly in terms of attracting people to live in Chester Street, it's obviously not going to be a great selling point if people can't rely on what should be an easy commute. The other issue is, and I've raised this for many years now, is why later in the day the service goes to a 2-hourly service. And I think in any future franchise we should be looking at a more regular service, because I do think there is capacity here to grow the usage of Chester Street Station, and to reinforce the point made by the Honourable Member for Strangford, take people off the roads and actually onto the railways. Can I also take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to raise the issue around the cross-country service, which does stop at the Chester Street railway station. Now, there is a consultation at the moment about reducing the number of stops that cross-country do, and one of those proposals is to remove the service stopping at Chester Street to obviously increase the connectivity between major cities and towns on the cross-country route. Now, if that does happen, I have made representations on this, and I know the County Council have as well. It is important that those stopping services that are taken away are replaced. And I would like to ask the Minister if he could ensure that that is taken into account in terms of the consultation, that if those stopping services are taken away, that somehow we have a replacement service to replace that loss of, especially in the evenings, of the cross-country which stops at Chester Street.
On that point?
Briefly.
Very, very grateful. There is speculation within the industry that cross-country are actually proposing for the future that some, if not all of the services which come from the south coast of England would actually terminate at York. And never mind not serve Chester-Lee Street, which is obviously between York and Newcastle.
Well, if that would be a detrimental step for the North East. But again, I think it reiterates the point I made earlier, Mr. Speaker, that many people look at the north and perhaps think it goes as far as York, Manchester, and Leeds, and no further. Finally, can I just raise the issue around investment in Chester Street Station? I've raised with Network Rail the issue around investment in the station. The footbridge over the station is an appalling state of repair, and I've been told that any repairs will only take place or be painted by 2020. And again, I'd ask the Minister anything he can do to try and get Network Rail to address that. That would be very important, because again, if we are going to encourage more people to use the station, facilities need to be improved, and Network Rail leaving it till 2020 to paint a bridge I think is not acceptable. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, can I say that my constituents have had an appalling experience in a poor rail service through no fault of their own. But can I make this point? This is obviously about raising their concerns and the terrible way in which they've been treated. But for me, it is an important point about the economy and the economy of my constituents and the future of my... I'm sorry, I was about to finish. About the economy of my constituency and how viable it is to attract for people to come and live at what is a pleasant part of County Durham.
I call the Minister, Andrew Jones, to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I just start by congratulating the Right Honourable Gentleman for securing this debate. He raises a number of very important issues serving his constituency and broader County Durham, and I will address them all in my remarks. Can I just start by saying I completely recognise how important the Chester Street station is as a vital local link for the Right Honourable Gentleman's constituents. I know people rely upon that station and the services there, and indeed his point that the service is growing can be confirmed because we have seen passenger numbers increase by about 30,000 a year over the past 6 years. An average of just over 600 passengers per day use that station, and people using the station play a vital role in the local economy, including giving people access to employment, as he mentioned, in both Newcastle and in Durham. Now, almost all of its services are provided by Transpennine Express, with a handful of additional peak services from Northern and Cross Country. And I recognise there are performance concerns raised by him and indeed the Honourable Gentleman for Gateshead. I will address those in my remarks. He rightly focused on the central issue of performance and how bad it became, particularly after the May timetable change. Let me stress that I entirely agree. The services that were offered to several parts of our country, including across franchises in the north of England, were unacceptable. But I must also stress that important lessons have been learned from that, and that some of these learnings have already been implemented by the industry and have led to a significant increase in performance. So the planned December 18 timetable changes in the north were deliberately scaled back in favour of a more phased approach. This was about mitigating risks to the extent that it was largely a rollover from the May timetable, with a focus instead on some performance fixes to improve reliability. The focus has been on improving the resilience and reliability of the network. For TPE, Transpennine, this included changes to local services between Leeds and Manchester, and I fully recognise that the north does go further north than Leeds and Manchester. I, of course, represent a constituency to the north of Leeds and Manchester. And these changes have already delivered significant improvements with the provision of standby trains at key locations to help recovery should things go wrong. Now, I look at the performance daily, and I know that many colleagues across the House will do the same, but performance on Northern and TPE has improved significantly since December. On TPE, the performance has increased to around 83% on time. The measure that is used is called PPM. It's available online, and it has now reached 83%. Now, obviously, that presents still a significant amount of room for manoeuvre, and it is below target. But it is also 18% higher than the last period before the December changes. So, although there has been this improvement in punctuality and reduced cancellations, I share the view from colleagues right across the House that this is still not good enough. On Northern, the January figures so far show that around 89% of trains are on time, which is also an improvement on December, an improvement of around 10%. And I'm pleased to report that the number of trains that are late, very late or cancelled has substantially declined. This month, fewer than 1 in 10 have been late and just 1.3% very late or cancelled. I also recognise the base that they are starting from, and that recovery of trust with their passenger customers is critical and will only be delivered by a relentless focus upon reliability and punctuality. Yes, happily.
I agree with the Minister, but the concern I would transparent on, they don't care. For a company which seemed to be, should be focused on what is good for customers, they've got no customer ethos at all. And how we change that, I would love to know.
Minister. Well, that is a very significant point that the Right Honourable Gentleman makes. I have to say that has not been my experience when I've been dealing with the train operating companies. But it is absolutely clear that the communication, which he mentioned in his speech, has not been good enough. And I will come on to address that point in just a moment. I'd just like to finish off some remarks about the performance. Now, as part of a drive to improve the wider performance right across the north, the government commissioned Richard George, who's a very respected industry figure, to review the performance of the region's rail network. He will recommend operational improvements to increase reliability in the short and in the medium term. Richard will coordinate and lead efforts of Network Rail and the operators. His remit is to help industry reach the right conclusions so that passenger impact is central to every planning decision. The passenger must be at the centre of all of our decisions. He's already helped highlight problem areas and will provide his conclusions later this year. In addition, since the May timetabling issues, Network Rail has established a Programme Management Office. This will also help to ensure that future timetable changes can be better planned and managed. There will be no repeat, no going back to the processes that led to the failure of May 2018 and that timetable change. Let me just comment about the communication. I have to say I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for raising the issue of poor information about cancellations and delays. It is something I hear in other parts of our network too, and it is simply not good enough. There are customer information screens at Chester Street Station, and both TransPennine and Northern publish updated information on their websites and social media channels, and we continue to stress to these operators and indeed the whole industry of the absolute importance of giving passengers the information they need when things go wrong. This is something that I have raised with the train operating companies and will continue to do so. It has not been good enough. Obviously, I want to get to the place where we don't have to make these changes, make these comments. But until we reach that point, a focus upon communication is important.
And the Minister give way?
I will.
I'm very grateful. In my experience, trains that serve Chester Street moving both north and south can suffer from cancellations because if a train is coming from the south to the north and is late, it is the habit of the operator to terminate that train at Darlington, and therefore not allow it to travel on through to Durham, Chester Street, Newcastle, and then make the return journey. Can we actually ask those franchises to stop that practice, please?
Minister. Well, the point that the Honourable Gentleman makes is important, but there is a point which has to be considered in the operation of a timetable, which is how do they recover? If something goes wrong, how is that timetable recovered? Well, additional rolling stock, the Honourable Gentleman mentions, is exactly what is happening. I'm going to come on to rolling stock in just a moment. So I understand his point. I understand also where the train operating companies are coming from, but regularly disadvantaging the same customers is not acceptable. I want to get to the place where we're not in the position where we have to have these questions in the first place. But if things do go wrong, I'd also want to make sure that we have compensation schemes, and we have seen delay repay schemes. And after May, the government asked Northern and TPE to implement special compensation schemes that quickly and fairly reimburse those passengers most adversely affected, and that included regular service users from Chester Street. And to date, over £1 million has been paid in compensation for the summer disruption. In terms of rolling stock, well, passengers will see the benefit of the new huge investment in rail in the north of England when the new rolling stock enters service this year. As part of the investment in TransPennine, 3 new fleets of Nova trains will be introduced. They will start to be introduced from May of this year. They'll be introduced through until the end of 2020. For Chester Street, longer brand new trains will be in service, whilst on Northern, the outdated and unpopular Pacers will be removed by that franchise by the end of this year. Passengers using the Northern services in County Durham will see refurbished trains offering increased capacity. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, in terms of the Nova trains, they are faster, they have more capacity, and we are moving from 3 to 5 carriage trains. So that means over 150 extra seats. In terms of the replacement of the Pacers, they're typically being replaced by, in some cases, by refurbished stock that's being cascaded down from Scotland. And these are Class 170 trains, and these are also longer than the trains they replaced. They're increasing in size from 18 metres to 23 metres per carriage, so again increasing the capacity. In fact, the vast majority of the 500 brand new carriages that we will see from Northern and TransPennine will be delivered in less than a year from now, and every other train that is not brand new will be refurbished to be as new. The cross-country consultation was a concern, and that cross-country consultation ended on the 30th of August, and we're conducting a thorough review of its findings. No decisions have been made about the cross-country timetable. The East Coast mainline timetable will be rewritten to all operators in 2020-21. This will be an opportunity to review the current train service at Chester Street alongside wider long-distance service changes. The only decision that's been taken so far is to cancel the franchise competition due to the rail review. And the current franchise ends in October of this year with the option to extend by 1 year. Now, we're looking at options for the franchise, and we are aware of severe overcrowding on that network. So we are looking to bring in additional trains as soon as the appropriate train carriages are available within the existing rolling stock market. But the importance of Chester Street and the North East to the cross-country franchise is noted, and I just ask colleagues here to, they asked me to note it. I have, and I give them my assurance that it will be considered. In terms of the services at Chester Street Station, well, it's managed by Northern. They are conducting improvements throughout the life of their franchise to ensure the station is well maintained. I understand, of course, how inconvenient it has been for passengers in the interim, but the waiting room and toilets are due to be refurbished very soon. As for the bridge, well, we're painting a structure here that spans the East Coast main line, so it's not quite so simple as a regular painting job. It's one that would need to be planned so it would minimise disruption. But the Right Honourable Gentleman's point has been heard, and I will ensure Network Rail are aware of his concerns. Our railways have to be fit for the future, and that requires investment, vision, innovation and ambitious thinking so that our rail network meets the needs of the people who rely upon it. That is the point of our rail review. The service that we have, the structures that we have had, have served us well, taking us from 700 million passenger journeys a year to 1.7 billion. But times are changing, we are seeing huge investment. We are on the cusp of experiencing the benefits of billions of pounds of investment. Our railways are undergoing much needed transformation that as a country we have never experienced before. This will improve rail services in the north of England for good, and it will see rail play its part in driving economic growth right across the north.
Yeah. Thank you. Order. The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.